is extend at that point, right? So if you extend the story of uniqueness, the story of the link, and the story of the impact, then you're not stuck overusing your time. The time skew will still work in your favor. If you spend all of your time in your rebuttal by re-examining your original link evidence and extending it with 3 new cards, then it's a time suck for you. All right. Pulling everything is a bad idea. We've established that, right, in the time skew. So your cross applications are always going to be your free argument. This is, again, complementing the idea that your 1NR is a rebuttal and not a constructive. If you try and pull everything, you lose your credibility, and you lose your time. And most importantly, you're going to lose the story. If your story is on topicality, you want to establish topicality credibility. Go for 1. Don't go for 2, don't go for 3. It makes the affirmatives cross applications a lot easier and makes your story a lot less consistent. If you have a position that seems to mesh well with another one, you probably should have run the right shell in the first place. For instance, a lot of people would say effects topicality is going to be different from something else. Your best bet in that point is to start your strategy early in the 1NC. You establish an effects standard within a different shell, if that's what you're going to go for. But if you're in your rebuttal and you have 2 rival shells, one of them's working, one of them's not, you can't go for both anymore. And your best way to regain the credibility is to collapse right then and there. I establish a rule of 3. You should always have 3 ways to access your ballot. You might want to have 3 different disheads. You might want to have T, a case press, and a dishead. You might want to have 3 different case presses. Or, if you're running a critique, you might have 3 ways in which you access the ballot. No matter what, a rule of 3 does a lot for you in a rebuttal. First of all, it gets picky judges. A lot of judges don't like certain arguments that you run. They're annoyed by them, and they're annoyed by you if that's the only thing that you're pulled through. I don't know how many times you guys have heard something where they say, well, you argued that position well, but I really didn't like it. Don't put yourself in that position. Diversify. Additionally, there's some strange math that goes on when you do the rule of 3. If you lose 2 positions, but you argue them credibly and well, judges give you leeway on the 3rd position. It's a form of unintentional intervention that you should capitalize. The best way to capitalize on it is by diversifying your arguments and making sure that you're never losing the credibility factor. Additionally, don't forget the time allocation of the 2AR. If you have 3 ways of voting for you, they have to spend a minute on each, let's say. If they spend a minute on each, don't forget that the 2AR doesn't really have a minute on each because they have to worry about their overviews. As well, they have to worry about lagging arguments that you're not going for. So let's talk about kicking versus lagging. Kicking is where you clean up your story, so you tell the consistent one, and you establish credibility. If a judge knows that you're not pulling through bad arguments just to have something to talk about, they tend to look at your arguments as having a lot more dire consequences than they probably do. Lagging is when you're pulling through D rules for bad arguments, or some sort of ambiguous threat. The good part about it, it ties up the affirmative. They have to spend time in their 3-minute speech. The bad part is, it'll usually cost you credibility. So there are conditions for when you lag. You want to lag only when it's potentially functional and when it's always credible. Types of lags. In T, T is the most obvious. Sometimes you're losing T. You're losing it clearly. You're winning the definition and you're winning the violation, oh boy, but you dropped 4 counter standards. Most likely, you don't want to lag in that sort of scenario. The judge knows that you're getting killed on the flow. But if you want to lag in a way that at least ties them up for a while, pull through the definition that you win, the violation that you win, and then you want to pull through the voter anyway. Because you say, hey, it makes sense. I've proved all this. And if you're uncertain, then you can vote here. If you do that, it's not really making a very good argument, but people are afraid of T, and they'll at least have the sheet of paper to address. Weigh how credible your initial arguments were in that case. If you think the judge is going to look at the shell and you've got a good shell, go ahead and lag it. If your shell was a one-word standard and two one-word explanations of voters, then don't even bother. All you do is tank yourself. Now, when you're lagging, remember to establish risk. A good lag is going to be a credible argument where you're still going to be able to have weight to it, right? So if you're losing a disad, and you know you are, but they're killing you on the link level, you can still lag with something that is incredibly unique with a looming impact. Why? Because it's incredibly unique with a looming impact. You know that there's some scenario that exists where an impact can be triggered, and you know that it's not going to happen in the status quo. I can think of 1,000,001 politics scenarios that have terrible link scenarios that judges might still weigh in some way. The affirmatives know that too. That's why they're going to cover. Now when you kick, make sure that you're fast and effective. I want you to do some things. The first is be defensive with your kicks. Remember to diffuse the kicked flows from new cross applications and new arguments. I don't know how many times I've seen affirmatives try and cross-apply no link stories to explain why it is that they win case. It happens. On a solvency advocate position, somebody might cross-apply their framework of a solvency advocate position to answer why topicality is irrelevant, or why the framework of a critique makes no sense in a policy debate world. So when you kick, you want to extend their diffusing arguments. Remember to remind the judge that if they were to suddenly go against their diffusing arguments that say this position is nonsensical, that they don't suddenly try and resurrect it for themselves. So things to watch for in that case might be if affirmatives win non-uniques, they might apply that to case. Some people will put non-unique in case I prove that this sort of scenario is going on in the status quo. Lots of people cross-apply that. In T framework, you can apply it to critiques, and in solvency advocates, you can also apply it to counterplans. So watch for that. You might also want to warn the judge and establish some sort of instantaneous D rule for new arguments there. Remember that they're trying to capture an off case from you and use it against you at that point. You might want to say that they're essentially running a new off case in their last rebuttal for it. But most importantly, when you're kicking, is to prioritize the weight elsewhere. You're not kicking so that you can spend all your time explaining why this position doesn't bother you. You're trying to establish why everything else that you're winning is so damn important. So let's talk about why everything else is so damn important. First of all, things might seem a whole lot more important when the affirmative drops case. When you're standing up for your 1NR, the number one thing you look for is whether or not they drop case. It happens a lot. It happens a whole lot, and people will resurrect their case through referring to applications in their disadvantage responses, or applications in their critique responses. But 9 times out of 10, nobody's extending an inherency story that maybe you commented on somewhere. Nobody's going to extend why their harms do make sense if you just said it in passing. Remember all that stuff, because it's relevant. It might not be the round winning argument, but I'll tell you what, it'll make them take out their flows all over again. It'll make them have to extend by point why their harms make sense suddenly, and they have to backtrack. That works in your favor. You want to establish your risks of disadvantages. Don't forget probability likelihood. Don't forget magnitude. Don't forget time frame issues. All of these are what make effective lags, and they're also what gets you out of scenarios like these. So let's talk about how to get rid of the 3 turn disadvantages. The first, are their turns consistent? Sometimes they're not. I think it's great when people use non-unique link turn, non-unique link turn, and then suddenly they'll have an impact turn on the 3rd one. They might do that, and in so doing, they can suddenly start granting links to you on one flow that they didn't on another. That's a grayed out. Don't forget that affirmatives can have contradictory positions too. It's not just negatives. The other thing is, if they make non-unique stories on the disad you don't like, you might want to explain why their argument claims that your scenario doesn't make sense whatsoever. That their non-unique proves that a disadvantage is empirically denied.